And then we'll call to order the special joint training workshop of the Corte Madera Town Council, Sanitary District Number 2 Board, and the Corte Madera Planning Commission at 5:04 p.m. Do a quick roll call of the town council members present. Councilmember Casisa?
Here.
Councilmember Lee?
Here.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Here.
Vice Mayor Kuhnhart?
Here.
Mayor Beckman?
Here.
Okay, I am not as good with the Planning Commission, so I'll just go in order as you're appearing on the panelist roll. Commissioner Bandel?
Here.
Chair Chase?
Here.
Commissioner Rizzo? Present but muted. Commissioner Bundy? I am expecting him, but he is not here yet.
Here. Sorry.
Thank you. And Commissioner Metcalf is expected to be absent. And that's it.
I think with that, Amy, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
I think we technically have to ask for public comment.
Okay, we will take public comment. Rebecca, am I? I don't see any attendees on the line here, but I don't think I'm a host, so let me know if you see.
No, actually, let me make you host. But no, there are no attendees currently and no raised hands, and we did not receive any emailed public comments.
Great. Okay. Good evening to the council members and hello to the planning commissioners. I haven't met you yet. I'm interim town council Amy Ackerman. And I'm going to do a brief training tonight on quasi-judicial meetings, fair process, government ethics, and the Brown Act. So what we want to do tonight is just give you a basic knowledge of fair process principles that apply to quasi-adjudicatory proceedings and apply government ethics and the Brown Act in this context. So we first need to sort of talk about what is a quasi-judicial proceeding. So generally, or often, a commission or a council acts legislatively. They adopt an ordinance or adopt rules that are general application on the basis of broad public policy. But there are times when you act in a quasi-judicial capacity where you're actually determining and applying facts in a particular case. And for the Planning Commission, if you're hearing an application for a conditional use permit, for example, you're like a court, you're deciding the case before you. And the council, if that matter got appealed to you, you would be deciding the case before you. And that's what we mean by quasi-judicial. So there are a number of different laws that apply, and they don't always mesh cleanly, and we'll talk about that later. So we'll talk about fair process requirements. I'm just going to talk briefly about conflict of interest rules that can apply, and then just a little bit about the Brown Act and how it applies in this context. And hopefully you won't be as bored as this gentleman seems to be. So we'll start with fair process hearing requirements. So where do these come from? Well, we know the Brown Act is actually a whole list of laws that the legislature passed, but we also have different kinds of laws which are referred to in the legal game as common law, and those are laws that come out of decisions that are issued by courts of appeal. So these don't come from a particular statute, but these are rules that are created by courts. And so what this is really about is to make sure that the public officers, and that would be you in this context, exercise your powers with disinterested skill, zeal, diligence, and primarily for the benefit of the public. So in other words, you want to be like Ruth, you want to be this independent, thoughtful, dedicated judge who listens carefully to the cases in front of you. So it's pretty simple. What you need to do is make sure that your decisions are based on the evidence that's presented to you at the hearing, not evidence that's outside of it or impressions or thoughts that people might tell you. You've got to be like a judge and jury, listen to the evidence. You can't prejudge specific facts, and you need to be free of prejudice for or against any party. And as long as you do that, you're fine. So although I'm calling you that you're acting like a judge or acting like a jury, the standard that is applied is different because you're not judges and juries. You're council members and planning commissioners, you're citizens who live in the community in which you're going to be deciding issues. So you're not supposed to be in an ivory tower. And obviously, you know your town and you know what's going on in it. That's why you're in the positions that you are. So what the courts have said is there has to be an unacceptable probability of actual bias on your part. So you never imply it. You have to show bias with concrete facts. So there is a recognition that, you guys are different from a judge and jury. You live in your communities, you know what's going on. So when I say that this is law that comes out of cases, what we do is we read these cases and we learn principles through these cases to apply. And I have to say, the cases are a little bit of a collection of council members behaving badly, I'm sad to say. And that's how we learn how to make sure you behave just as you should, as I'm sure you do. So in this case, Clark versus City of Hermosa Beach, this is one of my favorites. So in this case, the person wanted to tear down their house and build a taller 2-unit condo on the beach, and actually within the height limits of what the law allowed, but needed to get a permit. And in this case, the council member happened to be a block away from this development, and the project would have had a direct impact on his ocean view. Now, it wasn't a political reform act problem, as we talk about later, because he didn't own the property that he was living in. It was a rental residence. And although the act now covers a lot of leases, it didn't at the time. And so you realize he couldn't really be impartial. This project was going to block his ocean view. So you had a fact of actual bias. But on top of that, he showed what the court called personal animosity to the party in question. And you might wonder, well, what the heck was that? And it is one of the funnier footnotes I have read in a case opinion. The council member would run by the homeowner's house in the morning making loud, obnoxious noises. And I quote the court on that one. He also, I'm loath to say, urinated on the property owner's house. Given the poor behavior, the court found it pretty easy to find there was personal animosity here and that he couldn't be impartial. And so the court said, no, this was bias, and this poor property owner did not get a fair hearing. So some of the other things that were found to be unacceptable is a case out of Los Angeles where the planning commissioner was actually the president of his apartment Studio City Residents Association. And that alone did not disqualify the planning commissioner for serving, because again, we recognize that people live in the community and they are going to be involved in their community. That's why they're in the positions they are. But unfortunately, he wrote a newsletter, an article in his association's newsletter attacking the project that was going to be coming before him. And when it got to the hearing, he disclosed that he was the president of the association, and he disclosed that the association had an article written against the project in the newsletter, but he didn't disclose that he actually wrote the article opposed to it. And the court said, no, that's biased, and that property owner couldn't have had a fair hearing, and so he was overturned. And just so you know that this kind of stuff is still happening today, we had a case come out this year out of Sacramento in 2020. And this was a case where the council member lived. The question was whether to put in, I think, a gas station in a shopping area in a particular neighborhood. And the council member lived in that particular neighborhood, and that was okay. And he was a member of his neighborhood association, and that was okay. And important to note that it wasn't going to affect his home differently than anybody else in the neighborhood. So it wasn't like his ocean view was getting blocked. But he really crossed the line and went and became an advocate against the project. He counted votes, and he communicated to the mayor about the votes. He compiled talking points against the project and emailed them to the mayor's advisor. He sent suggestions to the opponents of the project on what points to make and what to do. And he basically advocated against the project with his colleagues. So court said, no, you can't become an advocate against the project. That project, you couldn't possibly do a fair hearing. So the court reversed it and said, no, you got to hold another hearing. You need to recuse. You can't be part of it. So those are the types of things that the court is looking for, actual signs of bias. So how do you avoid that? Well, before a matter comes before you on the hearing, when you know it's on the application, avoid ex parte meetings. And what are ex parte meetings? That's meeting with one side. So you don't want to meet with one side as opposed to the other, and not meet with the other. And you want to avoid getting impressions outside of the hearing that's coming before you. So avoid, you may have an opinion, you may generally know about the situation, but avoid expressing your opinion on that, because you are supposed to listen to the evidence and make your decision based on the evidence. So avoid expressing opinion, and obviously limit your communications with your colleagues. You need to do that anyway under the Brown Act, but you definitely want to do it from here, and refrain from advocacy, because you need to decide things fairly, but you also need to avoid giving the impression that you're not deciding things fairly. So some of these things help avoid giving that impression. Now,
Hey, Andy, quick question, if I may.
Yes.
You said avoid meeting with one side. If one side requests a meeting with you, would you recommend that one of us should then go and try and solicit a meeting with the other side, or just not necessarily do that, but just fully disclose any meetings that we did have? Or how would you recommend?
Well, I would recommend not meeting, because you really should be basing your opinions and your decisions on the evidence that's presented to you at the hearing. And I know that can be uncomfortable, but the Planning Commission has rules, and I think the council has rules to sort of avoid that, because it really is your duty, and they should be focusing their efforts on their presentation before the council.
Understood. Thank you.
But if in fact you do have some contacts, and sometimes you might have contacts before the matter comes before you, which you can't avoid, we always want you to disclose those contacts at the start of the hearing. And you can say, I did have a meeting with so-and-so, and I did have a meeting with so-and-so. The fact that you have the meeting alone is not going to be enough. You might also say, although I met with this person, I'm prepared today to listen to the evidence and make my decision based on the evidence before me.
Perfect. Thanks.
Sure.
I have a follow-up on the same? Real estate matters are very complicated, 3, 4, 5-dimensional matters, and we're encouraged to go look at the site and see what the issues are from different points of view, literally. And so I guess I'm having a little bit of a feeling a conflict with the avoid any ex parte meetings if we are supposed to look at the site.
Right. And that is right. And the Planning Commission rules actually do require going to look at the site. There are different ways to avoid that. One is to go look at the site and listen, but not give response that indicates what you're doing. I think it's also, we might consider in the future looking at having staff go with and then reporting to. I think again, I think this is why there's no specific case law on this. What's most important is disclosing any contacts that you have. So I think it's perfectly fine to say, I did go visit the site and I did ask a couple of questions about this. This is what I learned, and just disclose it out there. As long as you're prepared to then listen to the evidence and make the decision based on that, I think you're fine. What you don't want to do is, get into like suggesting to the party, oh, here's how I would handle this before the commission, and start crossing that line into listening into advocacy. But it's a fine line, but the disclosure is really, really important if you do have meetings.
David, Adam would actually have two people go, and then a lot of times when it was more contentious, staff would be present in the meetings when I was on the planning commission. So that's one way that I've seen it be handled correctly. Just driving around the site or walking, if you're not interacting with them, that you don't have to have a second person, but it's always good to go with two, but no more than two. So that way, also, if there is communication, it's heard by others that aren't the ex parte, right? So.
Yes, excellent points. I recommend all of those things.
Hey, Amy, this is Fred. Quick question. Yeah. Do any emails, text messages that would go, say, to a council member or planning commission member on an individual level, I assume those have to be disclosed? Do those need to be actually like printed out and disclosed in that sense?
Well, it would be a public record under the Public Records Act. There wouldn't be anything. So it would be if requested, you would have to disclose it. I think at the hearing, it's likely enough to say I received a communication, but then if anybody requests a copy, we would be required to disclose.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, sure. And during the hearing, you want to treat each side. First of all, we want to make sure you follow the commission and council rules. I mean, they're set out to make sure that the process is fair. So it's good to have rules, but it's really good to follow the rules. You want to treat each side fairly. If one side gets a rebuttal, the other side gets a rebuttal. If same amount of time for presentations, all of those basic things that you can think of. Listen closely to the evidence. There was a case where I think council members were reading the newspaper and texting or talking to each other during the hearing, and the court actually found that was enough to say they weren't deciding based on the evidence. So do listen, do pay attention, and then make your decisions based on the evidence. And I think during you follow these rules, you should be fine. Okay, so that is basically the fair process, and it's not a good PowerPoint if I can't get my dog Charlie into it. So those are the basic rules on fair process.
He's not on a 6-foot leash.
This was off-leash dog park. In fact, yes, it is off-leash dog park, although he's very old now, so he doesn't really go anywhere anymore, but in his youth he did. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about conflict of interest rules. So we'll talk about the Political Reform Act. An official may not participate in a government decision if it's reasonably foreseeable that the decision will have a material financial impact that's distinguishable from the impact on the public generally, on the official's immediate family, and some economic interests. This is a somewhat deceptively simple phrase that is actually really, really complicated. And each of the highlighted bullet points, there's regulations defining what that means. And then the Fair Political Practices Commission issues like hundreds of decisions every year deciding what is and what isn't a conflict under the particular factual situations. So these, this is really complicated stuff. So all I want to do today is sort of flag for you what to think about when something is going to come before you. Could this decision impact you or your spouse's residence? Is it within 1,000 feet of your residence? 1,000 feet is now the marker. Certain things, 500, certain 1,000, but if you're beyond 1,000, you're okay. Is it within 1,000 feet of your real property interests or anything? leases are now covered other than month to month. So if you are a rental property owner and you have more than a month to month lease, consider it to be your residence, and that applies. Could this decision affect your business? Could it affect your investment interests? And then sources of income, which is really the most difficult part of this, is that if you have clients that pay you over $2,000, I shouldn't say, I can't remember the exact amount, their interest can become attributable to you. So there's a lot to this. So just if you're coming up on a decision, you take a look and you go, oh, I wonder if I'm within 1,000 feet of that. That seems pretty close. Maybe I should touch base with staff or council, figure this out. Could this affect your business? And these are just kind of the red flag areas to think about. It is possible. There are exceptions. So even if you think, well, this could, I should look into it farther, see if this is an issue or if it's not. All I can say is it's super fact specific. The regulations are super detail oriented and complicated. So definitely feel free to reach out if you think it might be or you don't know, because it's better to be safe and ask and figure it out. If you do have that kind of conflict, it is, you've got to disclose that economic interest on the record. You've got to leave the room. You have to abstain from participating in or influencing the decision. So it's not just voting on the decision. It's actually having any participation or any influence, talking to staff, doing all of this. And this applies to everybody. Council members, planning commissioners, the town manager, to me, and to officials that manage public investments. There is a lively, there has been lively conversations on how do you actually leave the room during Zoom council and Zoom planning commission meetings. So the consensus seems to be you mute yourself and you turn off your screen. And that is like leaving the room. So, you know, just a plug for if you think it could be a conflict, let us know so we can work through the analysis and make sure you're safe to vote. I want to talk about just briefly, there is also on top of the Political Reform Act, a court created common law conflict of interest. It doesn't come up very often, but I highlight it. That it's basically when you have divided duties of loyalty. So let's say you're on a nonprofit board, you're also on the council. You as a board member to the nonprofit have a fiduciary duty and a duty of loyalty to that nonprofit. You also have a duty to the commission and council. So supposing a representative of the nonprofit is going to come and advocate about a project that you're going to be making the decision on. Well, I mean, what do? You've got loyalty on both sides. You can't really, you can't choose one loyalty over the other. You can't flip a switch. So in those cases, you disclose and recuse. Again, doesn't happen often, but it could come up. Okay, Charlie says we're done with conflict of interest and we can move on to the Brown Act. And the Brown Act applies, often not perfectly well with quasi-judicial proceedings. And there is Ralph M. Brown, in case you ever wondered who the Brown Act was named for. So I just want to talk about one piece of the Brown Act that can apply, and that is meetings. So, you know, a meeting occurs whenever there's a majority of your body, your commission or council, discussing any matter within the jurisdiction of the commission. So they can be formal or informal. It can be a retreat, and it can also be a site tour. And that's why we always say 2 members, not 3. You can always get together with less than a quorum of your commission or council meeting. My old boss used to say, you know, less than a quorum can get together and plan a coup. And the reason why is they can't actually have a coup because they're less than a quorum. So all of these things apply. And I just want to highlight under COVID where, you know, there are rules. The Brown Act does allow for teleconferencing meetings, but there are requirements. You have to have identify the physical location of members. There's a lot of things. This is suspended under COVID. So that just to let you know that when we all get through this, knock on wood, we go back, the rules will look different. So for anybody who's sort of new to meetings and really have done these mostly on Zoom, they'll be a little different. We don't have to identify the physical location of members participating. Under normal teleconferencing rules, you do. You have to have a majority within the jurisdiction and all that. Those are suspended. And to comply, we still notice and post the agenda. We let the public observe and comment by telephone and electronic means. And we have to swiftly respond to requests for a reasonable accommodation, and we resolve any doubt in favor of openness. And there is some discussion going on. Is in some respects, people feel that the Zoom meetings are in a way encouraging more participation because it's so much easier to not have to go down to City Hall. You just flip on your computer. So it's kind of interesting to see what things will look like when we get back to normal, and how some of this, I think, will be a matter of practice. Now, the thing we have to be careful about in these is, of course, unlawful meetings. And those are meetings where a majority comes to a decision or discusses outside of a notice public meeting. And so pre-meetings, post-meetings, you get together before, you get together after, and of course, the big ugly one, seriatim meetings. So seriatim meetings are basically you reach decisions sequentially. You have one member talks to the next, and then that member talks to the other, and so you end up having a majority discussing and reaching a decision outside of the notice public meeting. And Brown Act frowns on that because we want public participation. Public has to be able to comment, and also they get to see you making that decision in public. So you can also all talk by phone or email, same thing. So these can happen through technology. It can also happen through human intermediaries. Staff can inadvertently. So sometimes staff will need to contact you and tell you something. In that case, it should be sort of a one-way conversation. Staff will give you that information. Don't give a decision or opinion back to staff that could get passed on, because sometimes this does happen inadvertently and you don't want that. And I just want to highlight, we have new Brown Act social media restrictions. The new law it's not finely crafted, as we lawyers like to say, and some of it seems like they didn't think through everything, but basically what we've boiled it down to is you can use social media to communicate to the public, and that's fine. You could use your social media to provide information to the public or to solicit information from the public. That's fine. What gets into trouble is when social media is used in a way that allows for meetings. So you should not respond directly to any communication made by any of your fellow council or commission members regarding something in the subject matter jurisdiction. If you want to like their family pictures, no problem. But if they're posting about something, then don't like it, don't respond. And it says that a majority of members may not use internet social media platform to discuss among themselves business. And here it's pretty broad. They said that discuss among themselves includes comments or use of digital media that express reactions to the communication. So even liking a post about something within your subject matter jurisdiction is going to be considered discussing. So rule of thumb, if your fellow members are posting about something within your jurisdiction, leave it alone, don't comment, don't post. But if you want to communicate with the public, that's fine. And then just lastly, I want to talk about public comment during quasi-judicial. So here's where the Brown Act and the fair process hearings don't really mesh particularly well. We know that each speaker gets the right to the equal time. They're open to criticize and no differential treatment on viewpoint or ideology. But it doesn't fit super well in the quasi-judicial context. And think about it like if there was a trial before a judge and jury, and they hear the evidence and they hear the arguments of counsel, and then the court allowed public comment. And you could get people saying, hey, I really liked that lawyer. He was really good. Or I thought that evidence was really stupid. And you can see where, you know, you get into not particularly being influenced by stuff outside of the evidence. And so we do require public comment, and you can listen to it. Just keep the fair process rules in mind. And this is one where, you know, it is public comment. It's not public question and answer. And I would say for the quasi-judicial proceedings, it's really good to leave it at public comment and not question and answer, because it's fine to listen, but you don't want to necessarily get into an engagement that could taint your decision-making process. Okay, there we go. We've covered an awful lot. Happy to answer any additional questions now or at any time in the future. Anybody have anything they'd like to ask at this point?
Hey, Amy, on recusing, I'm pretty close to the town hall project, so I have to recuse myself on those hearings. And when we're on screen, you're saying just shut my camera off, but I could still listen in, correct?
Yeah, I mean, technically you're supposed to leave the room. It just doesn't work that well with Zoom, but there isn't. So, I mean, you can listen, but you can't speak.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you could also choose not to listen if you know, you want to make your cut clear, but you can't speak. You can't in any way try to influence the decision by commenting, talking to staff later, you want to just steer clear. And, you know, I'm always like, I don't mess with the Political Reform Act because the penalties are pretty steep. So when in doubt, you know, go overboard.
So when we're when we're back in chambers, I would just leave the room.
Yeah, you would.
At
the beginning, you would say, I have a conflict of interest because I live within 1,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So under the rules, I'm going to leave the room. And then when the item finishes, someone will come in and grab you.
So that's still broadcast in the past, so you could listen on your iPhone or
right. Yes.
There are ways to basically still see what transpired in the discussion. Jim.
Right. And
yeah,
you're not forbidden from knowing what transpired.
That was my question.
Yeah. No,
yeah, because
you're forbidden from influencing or deciding or any of that. But no, you're not banned from knowing what's happening.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. David?
When did it become 1,000 feet? And doesn't that exclude most of us from most things in our little town?
Yeah. Okay. So that was reformed just in the last couple of years, and it was done to make things more simple. But I want to just say there's two different standards. Within 500 feet is a much higher threshold. Between 500 and 1,000, it's a lower threshold, and you look at these factors, and it's often the case that it has to really have an impact between the 500 and 1,000. So I like to just flag 1,000 because we have to consider it, but really it's usually the time that you are most often conflicted is 500. Between 500 and 1,000, the factors you consider, it has to be really significant. For example, you know, if they were going to tear down a house or a small store and build a shopping mall, where it could have an impact up to 1,000 feet, but it's generally like a big project that's going to affect you between 500 and 1,000. But I agree it doesn't fit well for smaller jurisdictions. I mean, it is much more onerous, all of the conflict analysis when you are in a small jurisdiction.
So Amy, does that mean that you can't participate just as a private citizen once you're
there are ways in which you can participate, and there are rules about when you can and when you can't, but you may sometimes be able to make a comment as a private citizen. So it isn't, so, you know, that's why, you know, talk to us early, talk to us often, so we can go through the analysis. And, you know, our job is to keep you out of trouble, but also to allow you to participate as fully as you can within the confines of the law. Particularly, I think particularly in areas where it's your own, when you're home, you generally have some rights. You may have less in other contexts.
Amy, this is Adam. Thanks. I just had a quick question about if there has ever been any court cases or decisions made about what constitutes enough time for, let's say, an opponent of a project to provide evidence into the record against sort of, as an opponent to sort of somebody who may be an applicant who's presenting sort of, this is my development project, and then you get, usually we limit it to 3 minutes for public to present their evidence, and how to handle, I don't know, I'm just curious if there are standards for that, and if it's ever been challenged in court that basically limiting opponents' time has led to sort of an unfair process.
That's a really good question that I will research for you and get back to you, because I don't know the answer, but I will get you that answer. I think that's a reasonable question, and that's one of the things. So giving everybody equal time, and it may. I mean, I have seen. I don't love it. People cede their time.
Yeah.
So if you have 5 people and they say, I'm going to cede all my time to Joe, who's going to present our whole thing. I don't know offhand if there's been cases challenging it, but I know it's a fairly common practice, but we can look into that further for you, and I'll let you know the answer, and I'll let everyone know the answer.
Thanks. Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
It's okay. I love it when I was always like, there's always something I'm like, oh, I don't know. I never thought about that. Yeah. For lawyers, that's just so exciting. Anybody else?
So I'm wondering if if somebody got up to make a comment about something that you knew was, or that is purely fictional, like fake news. Is there any restriction on somebody just saying whatever they want and not backing it up with any kind of information?
Sadly, no. And that's why the Brown Act's the public comment fit in these kind of hearings is a little bit problematic, because people have First Amendment rights. Now, it's a limited public forum. It's not a free-for-all. And that's why we're allowed to limit the time and do things, because government has a job to do and government needs to get its business done. But you can't really stop someone from speaking just because what they're saying happens not to be true. What you hope is that the people putting their cases on, are putting, they have their facts right, and you can rely on that.
Hey, Amy, it's RJ. I had a question about use of the town webpage or social media to get feedback. If you posted a report and it's on the town webpage, which is a public platform, and then you said, hey, BPAC or flood board, let me know if you have any comments. Or even if you put a next door post out, but maybe it's only a neighborhood within town and doesn't cover all town, and you said, hey, we asked for feedback from this neighborhood, flood board, BPAC, can you provide comments too? What's the rules there?
Well, I can tell you that I just gave feedback on the draft town social media policy, and so the town, the staff is working on getting a policy together so that we can give it to the council for approval, because social media offers great opportunities for public engagement, but there are some pitfalls. It is fine to solicit public comment on the website. I think that's absolutely fine. What we want council members and planning commission members or any board members to do is be careful. If one of your council members is engaging in it, you don't want to comment on that, but there's nothing wrong. I mean, I think the best use of social media is to provide information to the public or solicit information from the public. Where you get into trouble is when you start commenting on other people's reactions and start making a decision. Now, that's not to staff, that's directed to council and planning commission, because you've got to act at notice public meetings. The social media policy that we're working on will give more guidelines to staff about what's appropriate to post and what's not. But I think using social media to solicit information from the public and to provide information to the public is the best use. I mean, I think it's great if you're trying to, get citizens' reaction or how they feel about a certain project. I think it's great.
And then real quick follow-up, do those responses then need to go and be shared publicly?
So all of them would be subject to the Public Records Act. So if anyone asks for copies, you would have to disclose. Whether or not you have an affirmative duty to disclose, I think would sort of depend on the context. If because of the COVID restrictions, we are allowing public comment by email and technology. So I think if it related to an agenda item, you might need to do it, and your council members and your commissioners will probably want to know what public information you got on stuff. So it's kind of it's all subject to being disclosed. Whether you have an affirmative duty to disclose, I think it's going to depend a little bit on the context and what you're soliciting the information for.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Amy, one of the ragged edges of the difficulty for interpretation of this stuff for me is the question of whether I have an informed bias or a wisdom based on experience, or whether I have a specific illegitimate bias or predisposition or prejudice. I mean, if I have such, is it better to disclose that or to pretend that I'm objective? I mean, if I have a real bias in favor of colorful Victorian houses or against liquor licenses, should I come out and say that? Is that important to say that, or can you just engage in the process and use your wisdom that you've accumulated?
I mean, I think there was a quote when I did this training for attorneys. I read this quote from this kind of quaint opinion from 1976 that talked about the councilman, and it's all about how the council and it captures the distinction between being a judge and being a member of council, because the whole idea is that the council is engaged in the community. They know they know the people. It's kind of cute. They're gregarious. He's an extrovert. He and all of this. And so I think what you have to ask yourself is, the standard is really, am I biased against this particular party for a particular reason? When you look at those cases, it was, I've already made up my mind. I wrote an article against it, but I didn't disclose that I wrote the article. I helped lobby against this. I helped try to switch council members' votes on this. I lived a block away. He was going to block my ocean view, and I also engaged extremely poorly with the homeowner. So those are the things that the court's looking at, is actual facts of bias. The fact that you live in the world and you have opinions and beliefs, I don't think is enough to do it. If you can say to yourself, yes, I generally feel this way. And again, what these cases said, for example, was there's nothing wrong with a council member expressing their opinion that I think lower density is better, or I think residential construction should not exceed a certain height. The question is, in this case before you, are you biased against a particular party? Do you know them? Do you have a particular animus against them? Or can coming in here knowing that I have a life experience and I live in this community and I have certain beliefs, can I still listen? Can I still hear the evidence and then make up my mind? So I don't think you're supposed to, you know, throw out your experience and your life views and your opinions. It's really about the parties before you. Can I, and you know, if there's something that you feel like it doesn't matter, I can't, you know, then yes, but not just because you have certain preferences and beliefs about things. Does that answer it? I mean, it's a hard, you know, this is all based on case law. So we look at the opinions and we try to boil down the concepts from them. But most of the cases involve pretty egregious behavior, and I'm feel very confident, Mr. Vice Mayor, that you will not be the sort to engage in the egregious behavior. It is a little bit splitting hairs, but I will say that it is, you know, I didn't go into, there was one where the police chief and the council members were at each other's throat, and they basically were blackmailing each other politically. And I mean, it was horrible. And, you know, not coming into a hearing, having some ideas of what you think makes a good community is not that. Anybody else? Well, with that, I think school is over for the night. Thank you for being an engaged and participating audience. Definitely like it.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.